Welcome back to Reunite America. I'm Linda Lewis for We the People, and my favorite guest is back with us tonight, David Justice, the Colorado State Coordinator for We the People, and we are going to have a discussion tonight with regards that's going to lead us back to information on the Continental Congress that is coming up November 9th of 2009. Let me start off by just welcoming you, and thank you for driving all the way in from Gunnison again.
Thank you.
We appreciate you being here
You're
very
welcome.
much. I guess I want to start off and ask you, I know it has come to my understanding that We the People actually offers the sovereign American people a lawful, nonviolent solution, a means by which we can take back our God-given rights to liberty and the pursuit of happiness. Can you explain for us tonight how We the People has put that together, what that means in actual layman's terms that we can all understand?
Well, what we're doing is we're following a course of law. The original Declaration of Independence was had come about because the Founding Fathers had petitioned the King of England for redress of grievances. And the petitions for redress of grievances, they were numerous. And if you want to know what they were, you need only go to the Declaration of Independence, and there's an entire section. And the petition for redress of grievance is an ancient remedy, ancient in the context of Western civilization, going back to the Magna Carta, where the people have a right, basically, to petition for a redress of grievance whenever they feel that they've been wronged by the government. And this petition for redress of grievance has come up, and it makes its appearance in the federal Constitution under the First Amendment, where, and it's been referred to as the capstone right, the people of the government can make no law respecting an establishment of religion or impairing the freedom of the press or prohibiting the people to be able to speak and to freely assemble, and then the right of the people to petition for redress of grievance is the very last words in the First Amendment. Well, in about the 1990s, middle 1990s, Bob Schultz, who is the chairman and founder of the We the People Foundation, We the People Congress, began to put together petitions for redress of grievances. And he brought together teams of lawyers and specialists to put these petitions together. And in the process of doing that, assembled quite the education bundled up in these packages, then turned around and served the appropriate government officials. Well, the officials didn't respond. They went silent. And inherent in the petition for redress of grievance, we're taking the position, well, wait a minute, the government has to respond. They're our servant, you know, and when we petition the government for redress of grievance, not only can you trace this remedy back to the Magna Carta and
Sure.
up through the common law of England, you can actually find it in the principles of the Declaration of Independence too. But the irony is, in the principles of the Declaration of Independence, it's what prompted the Declaration of Independence that the king refused to respond to the petitions for redress.
Exactly.
So here we are now in the year 2009, faced with the same circumstance because the government has refused to answer our petitions for redress of grievance as well. Now, the petitions for redress of grievance basically put a burden on the government to respond. The principle of this country is the American people are sovereign, and if the people do petition the government, that they should expect an answer. But when the government refuses, it begs the question, well, if the government is going to refuse us a right to petition for redress, then how much longer will it be before the government refuses to allow us to peacefully assemble?
Sure.
Which brings us to the Continental Congress. Continental Congress that we're putting together is a peaceful assembly of Americans who will come together in a Continental Congress, not unlike what the original Founding Fathers did. There was no statute that authorized them to do this. They did this out of concern that the government of England was basically treating them like a bunch of animals.
Sure.
He'd become a despot. He'd become ruthless dictator. So here we are now, all these years later, and we're pulling a page out of the playbook of the Founding Fathers by calling a Continental Congress, as distinguished from, which is a Continental Congress, a Constitutional Congress. There's a lot of confusion going on, and as you see, I stumbled over it, so I'm glad I did that.
So let's clarify.
Let's clarify it. A Continental Congress is actually where the Constitution was formed in the first place. It predated the Constitution. It was the government that wrote the Declaration of Independence. It was the group of men that assembled before the Constitution was written. It was a group of men that operated under the Articles of Confederation. Once the Constitution was formed, they basically abandoned the idea of the Continental Congress and now began to operate under the Constitution. Here's our theory. The Continental Congress is what gave life to the Constitution in the first place. It's our position that the government, having breached the Constitution in a number of ways, which is what the petitions for redress of grievance were in the first place, was a challenge to the government's authority, having stepped outside the boundaries of the Constitution. When the government refused once again to answer those petitions for redress of grievance, now taking a playbook out of history, we're going back to the idea of the Continental Congress, because in essence what has happened is the government has breached an agreement that it had with the people under the Constitution to be accountable. So having breached this agreement, it puts us into a position of saying, well, wait a minute, what's a free people to do? What are we supposed to do next when the government that was created by the Constitution, that was created at the Continental Congress, is no longer subject to the Constitution, not even to the point where it will answer our petitions? And so if we fail to call the government to account in some manner, then we're going to find ourselves without remedy at all.
Absolutely.
So you suggested that we're suggesting that it's a solution, and I would say that's a stretch. We're not saying that this is a solution. What we're saying that this is a means to an end, and the end would be to somehow put the government in a position where it has to meet our demands relative to the petitions of redress. Now, under the ancient principle, under the Magna Carta, it actually said that if the king or one of his cabinet or whoever was serving under the king didn't answer these petitions, that the people had a right to seize their houses, to seize their lands.
Right. And
they could go up to everything except actually throwing them in jail. When you translate the petition for redress of grievance into America, you're not serving it on a authority per se. You're not serving it on a king or a subject. You're serving the petition for redress of grievance on your servants, your public servants, the government. Right. And so we have an expectation that these grievances be heard. The grievances weren't heard. As a matter of fact, these grievances we went to the courts and we petitioned the court to have the government answer our petitions, but the courts got behind the government and said, the government's not answerable to the people anymore. So we, having run out of ideas as to how we can then, operating under the principle of popular sovereignty, how can we call the government into account? And so the means to that end is we come together in a Continental Congress, the same way the Founding Fathers did, and begin to discuss the disgusting crimes of the government and have a conversation as to what means we could come to facilitate the end of calling the government back into account. So really the idea of the Continental Congress is a means to call government back to account, back to accountability.
Okay. So in an ideal situation, at the end of the Continental Congress, what would be the ideal situation?
The ideal
November 15th.
Well, let's see. I don't know. Fantasize here. The ideal situation is the government, which would be that entity, the Congress and legislative body, and the executive branch. Once we come into our Congress and come up with resolutions overriding the Supreme Court's decision, because the Supreme Court's decision is clearly wrong. Actually, the Supreme Court didn't make a decision. The Supreme Court chose not to hear the case. But it was the Court of Appeals that had the final say. The Supreme Court just rubber stamped it by refusing to hear our case. The best case scenario is that the government would say, you know, okay, I see what you're doing, you're right, you're coming together in Continental Congress, we'll answer your questions.